There was always something unsettling about the old family home. Emily had felt it ever since she was a child, a sense of unease that lingered in the quiet halls and dark corners where the light never seemed to reach. The house had been in the family for generations, a sprawling Victorian estate on the outskirts of a small town filled with the echoes of the past. But it wasn't until her parents passed away that Emily decided to return, hoping to find some closure and to settle the estate once and for all. The journey back was long and lonely. The road twisted through dense woods that seemed to swallow the light, the trees pressing in on either side as if trying to keep out the world beyond. When Emily finally arrived, the house stood waiting, looming against the grey sky like a shadow from another time. The windows were dark, the once vibrant paint now peeling and faded. The garden, which her mother had once kept immaculate, was overgrown with weeds, the flowers choked out by neglect. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories. The rooms were filled with old furniture covered in white sheets, like ghosts waiting to be uncovered. The floorboards creaked underfoot as Emily made her way through the house, each step echoing in the silence. She moved from room to room, lost in thought, remembering the way things had been. The way her parents had always seemed distant, as if they were carrying some unspoken burden. It was in the attic that Emily found the first clue. She had almost forgotten about the attic. Its door was hidden at the end of a narrow, twisting staircase, the entrance blending seamlessly with the wall. As a child, she had been forbidden from going up there, but now, as an adult, she felt compelled to explore. The door creaked open with a groan, revealing a space filled with old trunks, boxes, and forgotten treasures. Dust swirled in the dim light as she began to sift through the contents, uncovering old photographs, letters and mementos from a lifelong past. It was while she was sorting through one of the trunks that she found a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting inside was her mother's, neat and precise, though the ink had faded over the years. Emily began to read, and as she did, a sense of unease settled over her. The journal spoke of a child. Her mother had written about a baby born before Emily, a sibling she had never known existed. The entries were filled with love and joy at first, detailing the baby's birth and early months. But as the pages went on, the tone shifted, growing darker and more fearful. The writing became frantic, describing strange occurrences in the house, objects moving on their own, shadows in the night, a feeling of being watched. And then, abruptly, the entries stopped. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she reached the final page, where the writing ended mid-sentence, as if her mother had been interrupted. There was no mention of the child after that, no explanation of what had happened. It was as if her sibling had been erased from existence, wiped from the family's history. There were no photographs, no records, nothing to indicate that this child had ever lived. Disturbed, Emily searched the rest of the attic, hoping to find something that would shed light on the mystery. But there was nothing, just the journal, hidden away in a trunk, as if her mother had wanted to bury the truth. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that there was more to the story than she had uncovered. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the silence oppressive, pressing in on her like a weight. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with questions. Why had her parents never told her about the sibling? What had happened to them? And why had they been erased from all records, as if they had never existed? In the early hours of the morning, as Emily finally began to drift off, she heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, like the faintest whisper. She sat up, straining to listen, but the sound was gone. The house was silent once more, but the unease lingered, growing stronger with each passing moment. The next day, Emily searched the house from top to bottom, hoping to find some clue, some answer to the questions that plagued her. She combed through the rooms, looking for anything that might explain the journal, but all she found were more empty spaces, more echoes of the past. As she worked, the feeling of being watched grew stronger until she could no longer dismiss it as paranoia. It was in the old nursery that she finally found something that made her blood run cold. The room had been left untouched since her childhood, the crib still in its place, the toys neatly arranged on the shelves. But now, as she stood in the doorway, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a small child's handprint on the window pressed into the dust. It was fresh, as if someone had just been there. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she crossed the room, her breath catching in her throat. She reached out to touch the handprint, but as she did, the room grew cold, the temperature dropping suddenly. The air felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence. She turned, feeling as if someone was standing right behind her, but there was nothing, just the empty room, silent and still. But Emily knew she wasn't alone. The feeling of being watched, the strange sounds in the night, the handprint on the window, it all pointed to one thing. Her forgotten sibling, the child who had been erased from the family's history, had returned. Over the next few days, the activity in the house grew more intense. The sounds in the night became louder, more distinct. Footsteps echoing in the halls, doors creaking open and shut, whispers that seemed to come from just beyond the edge of hearing. Objects began to move on their own, furniture shifting positions, lights flickering without cause, and always there was that feeling of being watched, of someone just out of sight, hiding in the shadows. Emily tried to leave, to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the house, but every time she did, something held her back. The car wouldn't start, the doors would jam, the phone lines would go dead. It was as if the house itself was conspiring to keep her there, to prevent her from leaving. As the days passed, Emily's health began to deteriorate. She grew pale and gaunt, her eyes haunted by the sleepless nights and the terror that stalked her every waking moment. The house seemed to drain her energy, feeding off her fear. She started to see things, glimpses of a child out of the corner of her eye, a small figure darting down the hall, a shadow lingering just beyond the edge of the light. The final straw came one night when Emily awoke to find her bedroom door slowly creaking open. She lay frozen in bed, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the door inch open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. And then, in the shadows, she saw it. A small, pale figure standing just outside her door, watching her with eyes that gleamed in the darkness. Emily couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as the figure slowly stepped into the room. It was a child, a young boy, no older than 5 or 6, with pale skin and dark, hollow eyes. His clothes were old-fashioned, tattered and worn, and his expression was one of sadness and longing. But there was something else in those eyes, something dark and malevolent that sent a chill through her very soul. The boy stood at the foot of her bed, staring at her with those empty, hollow eyes. Emily felt a cold hand grip her heart as she realized who he was, her forgotten sibling, the child who had been erased from existence. He had returned, not as a living being, but as something else, something twisted by time and tragedy. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to get away, but she was paralyzed by fear, unable to move as the boy slowly reached out toward her. His hand was icy cold as it brushed against her cheek, and she felt a wave of despair wash over her, a sorrow so deep it threatened to consume her. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the boy was gone, leaving Emily alone in the darkness. But the terror remained. The memory of his cold touch seared into her mind. She knew now that she could never escape, that the boy would haunt her for the rest of her life, a reminder of the forgotten past that had come back to claim her. The house, once a place of memories and family, had become a prison, a tomb for the forgotten child who had returned from the shadows. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Emily's grip on reality began to slip. She wandered the halls like a ghost, her mind unraveling under the weight of the boy's presence, until she was nothing more than a shadow of her former self. In the end, the house claimed her too, just as it had claimed the boy all those years ago. The family home stood silent once more, its secrets buried deep within its walls, waiting for the next soul to uncover them. And those who passed by the old Victorian estate might still feel a chill in the air, a sense of something watching from the shadows. For the forgotten child had returned, and he would never be forgotten again.